Hey everybody, okay, I got here what I call the monstrosity. Just came back from the maiden flight, successful. It's the monstrosity because it's really heavy, extremely inefficient, flat plate, um, and it's vertical takeoff, twin engine, with counter-rotating props in order to avoid any torquing at very high power settings on vertical takeoff. And it's got 7 ounces per square foot wing loading, so once it's up there, it can float around pretty well. The idea, conceptually, is extremely simple. It's the actual implementation details, though, that become challenging. Making these vertical fins that go around both sides and allow the elevons to travel freely, and getting it all lined up properly and gluing it properly, and trying to make things so that you don't have too much weight, getting it balanced at the quarter chord. As you can see, I had to add a big kind of tongue sticking out in the front to mount the batteries on to get the proper CG location. I've got kind of fins coming out of the front to protect the prop on landing, although I land pretty slow. And the center section here actually cracked because I didn't have it braced, so it cracked right there along this line right here. So I braced it up after that, and it was fine. It actually cracked while I was testing, just making a short hop off the ground and letting it come back down. And then went out there, fixed it, and it worked just fine. And I'm gonna get a flying video of this guy up soon. The key factors to making something like this successful, which is pretty much the case for any kind of vertical takeoff kind of situation like this, pogo style airplane, Convair pogo style airplane, is to get the thrust to weight ratio quite high. You want to be able to blast the thing off into the air, and it basically get it set up so that when you do blast off at a very high power setting, it will tend to slightly nose forward as opposed to going into a loop immediately. So you want the vertical CG relative, when it's flat. For example, let's make it flat. So what we want here is that the vertical CG, when it's flat, is just about near the center line of the thrust, maybe slightly below. And the tricky thing here is getting everything braced properly. When you're dealing with a plane this heavy and this large, you got to get everything braced properly, but not make it ridiculously heavy. As you can see, I have a dowel going across there for a spar for the wing, and the wing, you can actually see it flexing in flight when you're doing a loop or whatever. This thing loops, of course, incredibly tight. The key factor here for getting this thing to fly relatively easily is to have a very low aspect ratio. In this case, the aspect ratio is 2.4. I think I mentioned that the wing loading is 7 ounces per square foot. So these things act together to make the airplane relatively simple to fly. It's that hop, that immediately leap off the ground and then transition to horizontal flight, which takes a little finesse. But once you're in the horizontal flight, it's extremely simple to fly. And of course, you need to make certain that your elevators are big enough, your elevons, I should say, are big enough. 25% of the chord is what I would say is a bare minimum on this guy, in order to have sufficient authority. And in this case, my vertical stabilizers are not movable. There's no rudder on them. I'm thinking of putting rudders on them in the back, so that making that rear section of the vertical stabilizer movable, so that when I'm doing hovering, basically when I bring it in for landing, I'm really essentially hovering it at an extremely slow speed and just letting it plop onto its tail. And with the rudders, it might be easier to make it do literally a proper vertical landing as well as the vertical takeoff. The vertical takeoff is relatively straightforward. The vertical landing is what takes the finesse, and in order to finesse that, you're going to need rudders on something like this. Yeah, so I'm going to be putting up the flying video for this hopefully later today or tomorrow. My neighbor who took one or two of my other videos is not the best cameraman, but I definitely need someone else to shoot this while I fly it. Anyway, so he might be able to do it for me, and I'll try to get that up soon. Thanks.